So, update on this Wagner coup, and yes, we are calling it a coup at this point. This is very well planned out, and I'll get to that in a bit. But looking at this map, this is an important map. The red shows the territory Wagner is currently occupying. Wagner forces have reached Lipetsk Oblast, which is about a 350-kilometer drive from Moscow. That's about 4 hours. Looking at this map, Wagner has taken roughly 1,200 kilometers of highway adjacent territory. Russia roadblocked the M4 highway, and Wagner flanked them using the E38 highway just before Voronezh. Now, reporting from locals say that the Wagner column, or at least this single Wagner column, as we've seen multiple moving across multiple highways in multiple directions, this singular column that is moving north of Voronezh has between 300 and 400 pieces of equipment and vehicles. So what's fascinating is Wagner Group took 9 months to capture Bakhmut and only 12 hours to capture all of this in Russia. Now, granted, Russia is not a war zone at this, well, it wasn't until just recently when this coup started. But this is indicative of how caught off guard the Kremlin and Russia was with regard to what Prigozhin was planning. And this looks like a far more well planned out coup attempt than it first appeared yesterday. I mean, you look at the equipment in the columns, and the Wagner Group fighters have Pantsir S-1 air defense systems. In Voronezh, a Russian Ka-52 helicopter was videoed attacking a Russian oil depot, indicating Prigozhin may have attack helicopter assets on his side. Or the Russians are destroying their own assets to keep them out of Prigozhin's hands. Wagner forces have reportedly already downed 2 Russian helicopters that were trying to attack them, and I'd be surprised that if, in addition to stockpiling munitions for this event, he was using the shortages, and this is being reported by some Ukrainian outlets, that his shortages over the last 3 months were just an excuse for him to hoard ammunition and weaponry for this operation. They've also seemed to have been recruiting Russian military, FSB, and law enforcement officials for months now, and nearly 250 confirmed Russian service members have defected to Prigozhin in the last 24 hours along the route. The Wagner forces they've laid mines along the roads between Rostov and Taganrog, one of the primary supply lines of forces to Ukraine. So right now, the southern military district is cut off from operations and logistics in Ukraine. And this was the headquarters that supported all of the front lines of where Ukraine would be conducting counteroffensive operations, whether it's in Zaporizhia or western Donetsk. Russian Federation Aviation is reportedly conducting airstrikes along the M4 highway, which, as you saw, was a lot of that red area. And this is near the Voronezh region. And even if you ignore the rumors about defection, this has been remarkably easy for Prigozhin so far. Understand, though, Wagner has a lot of experience overthrowing world governments. They've done it in 3 separate countries. And Wagner Group veterans have been told to wait for the go-ahead to join Prigozhin's uprising, with messages going out that say, quote, "We've been ordered to stand by in full combat readiness. There should be an order on further actions closer to this afternoon." Now, that was earlier this morning. It has passed afternoon, but again, just understand a lot of the reporting and information coming out of Russia is either going to come from the Kremlin side or Prigozhin's side, and neither have been shown to be truthful in the past. Again, we just talk about this as this is not nothing, though. So what's taking place is significant. The Russian military is actually shocked that a convoy can move with this speed without being stopped for weeks in a 40-kilometer traffic jam. But kind of the tongue-in-cheek joke aside, the way Wagner is moving heavy forces is more indicative of heavy-style doctrine than just rumbling tanks through towns. They are using heavy equipment transport-like platforms with lowboys rather than just slowly moving. This is a rapid capability. This is pre-planned logistics, and it's been quite well executed. And I just don't think anymore it was spontaneous or improvised. I truly believe that probably the rocket attack was not the trigger for this, but just yet another either false flag or just another Russia maybe caught wind and tried to conduct the attack. I mean, it looks like Wagner Group has pre-positioned stocks along the route. They've gotten aid from defectors and have freedom of maneuver thus far with only very small skirmishes along the route. It's quite interesting to see how many checkpoints Wagner is just moving through without any kind of resistance whatsoever. Nonetheless, I still believe Wagner is in a position of the underdog, so they must execute these actions carefully. And if they want to have long-term success, they have to consider potential alliances with other entities. Although there are plenty of shortcomings in the skills of basic Russian soldiers, the core of Wagner's professional soldiers are very competent as well. However, there are very well-trained Russian forces still under Russian control. Problem is, they're on the front line of Ukraine. So at what point do you triage what is the bigger threat? This column of private mercenaries moving on Moscow or the Ukrainian front line? Russian leaders face an immensely difficult situation, and if they respond to this with heavy military action aiming to fully eliminate and dissolve Wagner, it can affect the overall support of Russians of the war. The situation has already made Russia look weak, and Russia's already been absolutely weakened against Ukraine. And I fail to see how the Kremlin could create this deal with Prigozhin in this situation. It's just far too late for that. It's unlikely that you make a deal with an armed rebellion, and solving this in a diplomatic way went out the window the minute helicopters were being shot down. So as a result, Russia will lose Wagner as a fighting force, not only in Ukraine, but in multiple locations in Africa. And I don't know if there's a coherent commander that can take over those operations in Africa. And this is based on the assumption that Russia is actually able to contain this situation and defeat Wagner Group. However, I'm not confident that that is the end result of defeat of Wagner at this point. I keep saying I think it's going to be, and my odds are now changing from when I was doing my live. I give it maybe 50-1 odds, if not closer, because as we watch this take place, it seems Prigozhin has made a very astute plan and has a lot of fighters coming to his side. It just depends on the National Guard, which is called the Rosguardia, and who defects and what anti-partisan groups, and honestly what Chechnya does as well. And it's worth noting that the population of Rostov is something like 25% Chechen and North Caucasian migrant workers who were not big fans of Russia in the beginning and Putin. In fact, the commander Zeki of the Storm Z units, who are part of the Russian military in the 71st Guards Regiment, who is currently fighting in Ukraine against the Ukrainians, has expressed his full support of Prigozhin. These Storm Z units are mainly called the penal battalions and consist of convicted Russian inmates. The head of the Russian Volunteer Corps has been conducting operations in Belgorod over the last few months, said, "I call on supporters of the Russian Volunteer Corps to take action. We have a unique chance to determine our fate and the fate of the motherland." So now the Volunteer Corps, who is doing stuff in Belgorod, has stood up. We're seeing partisan groups stand up in Moscow. This is becoming a bigger problem than anyone anticipated, and Prigozhin was the trigger, and he apparently had well planned this. Russian Ministry of Defense has come out saying, "We appeal to Wagner assault squads. You are tricked into Prigozhin's criminal adventure and participating in an armed rebellion. Be prudent and get in touch with our representatives as soon as possible. We guarantee safety." A memo that came out from the Kremlin said it was a secret memo that Putin wants to kill Prigozhin and is even ready to grant amnesty to all Wagner PMC fighters who liquidate the mercenary head. This is according to the general staff. In Moscow, they started to take down Wagner PMC banners to promote joining them. Putin finally came forward and gave a speech, but it didn't instill any confidence. He said, quote, "We are fighting for the right to remain Russia, a state with a 1,000-year history. Actions are being carried out now. Our apostasy from the nation. This is a stab in the back of our country and our people. I believe that we will save and defend what is dear and sacred to us. Together with our motherland, we will overcome all trials. I urge the military to make only the right choice to stop participating in criminal activities." That is not something that instills confidence. Prigozhin responded with, "No one is going to confess and at the request of the president, the FSB, or anyone else, because we do not want a country to continue to live in corruption, deception, and bureaucracy. Counter-terrorist units have been activated in Russia. 2 hours ago, the Russian presidential aircraft took off from Moscow. No word on if Putin is on board. However, an hour ago, Peskov, the Kremlin press secretary, said Putin was still in Moscow. Richest member of the government and the State Duma, or the deputy prime minister, left the country, flew to Turkey. Russian police raided the headquarters of Wagner Group in St. Petersburg. China has said they are monitoring the situation. The U.S. has said they are monitoring the situation. The Ukrainian main intelligence directorate said what's happening in Russia is quite real, and they are monitoring as well.